and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
Welcome to the Aviatrix Book Review. I'm Liz Booker. My guest today is a helicopter pilot and flight safety international instructor. She's published several children's picture books and the middle grade novel Willow James and the Queen of UI's Crown. You can find her books on Amazon. Sarah Boutte, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to meet another helicopter pilot and children's book author. That's so cool, and I can't wait to hear about your book. I thought we would start off with reading a passage. Do you have one you want to read?
I do. This is from when the girls are introducing themselves to Willow when she meets them. "My name is Lorelei," the oldest girl said. "Not too much is special about me," she meekly smiled. Willow hoped she hadn't offended them by asking their gifts. Oh no, she thought, what if they didn't have one? She didn't mean to put them on the spot or make them feel bad. Just as her face was turning a deep shade of red, Tula blurted out, "They're being so shy and ridiculously humble. Tito is freakishly fast and freakishly strong, and Lorelei has to be so careful what she thinks about, because whatever she imagines comes true. She's also a helicopter pilot and on a helicopter dance team called the Dancing Dragonflies. They do choreographed dances to ballet and hip hop with their aircraft. Their helicopters are blinged out with glitter to the max, so sparkly. And it's so fun to watch. She's amazing. There's 10 of them that dance their helicopters together, and they never crash. They even do a night show with LED lights on their choppers. That's the hip hop one. It's incredible."
That is so fun and so creative. When you told me you had dancing helicopters, I was like, oh, I have to read this book. That's so funny. So
Yeah.
tell me about your flying background.
Well, it started as a hobby in college. So, and some of those things are funny. You'll see this probably throughout when we talk about my book later too, is that there's been a lot of times in my life that I do something and I think it's a new idea. And then later I find something from 10 or 20 years ago where I'm like, oh, this was always there. I just didn't know about it. So when I was in college, I thought that I had that new idea to go fly helicopters and I just wanted to do it one day. So I went and took a discovery flight and I absolutely fell in love. My dad kind of thought that that was as good a thing as anything else for his college kid to be doing. So he said he'd like meet me halfway. So I'd go bartender wait tables when I had half of the cost of a flight lesson. He'd pay the other half. And I just wanted to learn how to do it. I didn't realize I was getting my private. I didn't know that this would be my career. It was just a genuine, I just wanted to know that skill. Like I wanted to figure it out and learn how to do it. I remember when they told me it was time to solo and take my check ride, I was like, solo? What's a solo? I go by myself? Like I didn't, and the check ride, I was like, what's a check ride? That sounds fun. They're like, you just do everything, that we've been practicing. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, it's so funny that I give check rides now and people get nervous. I kind of laugh about that first private one I took because I really was just trying to learn. Way later, after I was a helicopter pilot, I found a journal when I was in like first grade and things I want to do before I'm 40, which is funny. I'm 40 now, but that's when you think you're going to be like, oh, it's over. Learn how to fly helicopters was written on there. So I know it was somewhere in me, but so I finished my private and then the next step was a lot. So I kind of just moved on, finished college, had moved, did different jobs, but I always really missed flying. So I started applying for scholarships and I got one to a flight school where I could see like a really efficient way to finish. So I won a scholarship, packed up everything I owned and moved to Mississippi to where the flight school was. And that there's a lot of other interesting side stories with that. But ultimately I finished flight school there. And then I went and flew helicopters offshore for like 7 years. It was challenging. It was always something that I felt like there were lots of parts to overcome. It's funny looking back on things too. A lot of people drop out of flight school at the 200-hour mark. Like they take out these big flight school loans and they get their private commercial instrument, CFI, CFII, and now it's time for them to teach. And it's just a big confidence jump. You go from the student to now you're completely in charge and you're giving someone who's never flown before the controls, which is kind of one of those just fake it till you make it. Or, really what I learned is you just keep it in your comfort zone. And even if that's really small, they can still learn from you. And that expands as you do it more. But there's a lot of places like that along the way too, where it's just a big jump, where there's a lot of kind of, find out what you're made of, sort of confidence things that you have to do. The same thing going from an R-22 to a 206 flying offshore to oil platforms. I mean, I think I was very low time when I got that job. I went as soon as I could get a job after flight school with the lowest flight time allowed, I think. And my first flight was to a boat. So I've never landed on a boat. So I'm already in this 206, okay, who gave me this big helicopter with a turbine engine? I'm used to my little R-22 with the tiny blades. And I see these big rotor blades in this big helicopter. And now I'm headed out to a ship to try to figure that out. And the heave is the maximum heave of the day. And I just remember flying out there okay, how am I going to do this? With no training. You've probably done a bunch of boat landings. You flew for the Coast Guard, didn't you?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the back of boats. Yeah, big and small. Those were some of the most harrowing landings sometimes. But, it's just like anything else in flying or anything else in life. The more you do it, the more proficient you are, the better you get at it. So I flew out of Miami for several years and deployed all over the Caribbean. And I was absolutely the most proficient I've ever been on ship landings during that time. And so what are you doing for Flight Safety International?
I'm an instructor in the AW 139. So I do 135 check airman, TCE stuff. I give check rides all the time, which is funny when we were saying that about check ride nerves and stuff. That's most of what I'm doing now at work. I do initials and recurrence, and I've been there 7 years. So after I went offshore, I went there. I missed the teaching aspect and the people aspect, I think, of flight training. So that was a good option.
And I see behind you there's a picture of a little girl.
Yeah, that's my little girl. I should have my little boy too.
Okay, so you have two kids. Did you have them while you were actively flying? How did that work out?
No, actually, I ended up starting at Flight Safety when I was pregnant with my son, which worked out really well. I think flying offshore with being pregnant and flying offshore would have been pretty crazy, especially when your babies are in the newborn stage, to have to leave them for a week. And I don't know.
So how old are they now?
They're 7 and 4.
Wow. And so have you been flying during COVID?
Our company has been a pretty steady. I mean, we have a lot of clients from the US that have been able to still come, but definitely slower than normal because all of our international training has either slowed down or almost stopped.
Oh, okay. And what's your support network for the kids?
Oh, they're both in school. So, and our schedule's kind of all over the place. So we're just make it work.
I know how that feels. Trust me. Yeah. And so in your spare time, you write books.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And tell me about the books that you've written and published.
Well, I've written 5 books, just one novel though. The novel probably is the most writing, the one I'm kind of the most proud of. It's the biggest piece of your heart and soul, been with you the longest kind of thing. But all of them were good for a reason. They all came. I don't know if you've read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
I just reread it a couple of months ago. I absolutely love that book.
It's a great resource for writers, I think. And it really, for me, it was spot on how the books kind of find you. My first book was called Do You Know How Much Your Mama Loves You? And I was reading this really sweet book to my little boy when he was 2 or 3 years old. And it was about how big a mother's love is, but it was completely written for adults. So I'm sitting there crying, thinking this is so sweet. And he's looking at me like, you love me like a dandelion? What are you talking about? So I was like, okay, this is, and a lot of what we do at work too, at Flight Safety, is making sure the message is received. So because so much of our instruction with that in flight training, everything is you can get immediate feedback if people hear and understand you. I think a lot of that translated into the stuff I was reading with my son, because I was like, this is not crossing the threshold. This is selling because moms like it, but it's not letting kids know how big and how much they're loved, So I wrote this really simple, sweet book in a child's language that's just direct and how they would talk, how it would make sense to them. And that book, honestly, like when people tell me like my 4-year-old sleeps with it, she asks for it every night, like it's been the most rewarding, just how deeply it touches the kids. Like it's really getting across to them. That was my first book, and I learned a lot of lessons about just all of it, like self-publishing, even finding an illustrator. Like I looked for months and negotiated with artists, and I eventually gave up and did it myself. And at the time I was like, my daughter was still an infant. So that book, I would stay up like 3 nights a week late at night, and I'd be like Photoshop painting on my computer for hours. It was like 8 months labor of love to get that one out. And then my second book, my son is like this really curious, like physics, interested in engineering stuff. And we couldn't find, there was a ton of STEM resources for like kindergarten and first grade, but there was nothing for 2 and 3-year-olds. So I'd mentioned earlier going to college, I went to University of Missouri Rolla, which is like an engineering school. And I switched my major, which was whatever. That's a whole nother story too. But all my friends are engineers and they all had toddlers. And so I called them and I was like, what are you teaching your kids? What's important? What are the important, like fundamental principles of this? And how are you teaching these 2 and 3-year-olds? And so that's the second book I put together. It's called Mama, Do You Know? It's like 12 different chapters of things, important principles like that, like CG, but explained again in a way kind of where kids can, understand it. A lot of what we do at Flight Safety is adult learning, like understanding that people need to kind of figure it out on their own if they're really going to own it and take it in. And I did a lot of that with my kids, which was really fun. It seems like adults always think that kids need to be taught and told what to do. And in a lot of reasons, I feel like the planet's energy is kind of shifting to higher vibrations. I'm into all that kind of stuff. But with that happening, I feel like there's a lot of kids that are coming here with a lot of wisdom in their own hearts and souls. And instead of us always telling them what to do, it's better to kind of give them resources to listen to and support that intuition. So that's kind of what my third book was for. It was called Mom, I Know Just What to Do. And it's scenarios set up that just kind of open a discussion about what they think, give them kind of a tough situation. A lot of times we're in the heat of the moment too, right? So like you're at the park and your kids are fighting over a toy. It's really hard to sit down and explain all the aspects of that situation and everything they could think about. Same thing if like someone calls them a name or people are leaving them out, just kind of laying out some of those scenarios where you ask the kids, like, what would you do? What would you think about this? That kind of stuff. So that one's kind of fun. The fourth book I wrote in 2 hours. So this was, and this was exactly, in Big Magic, where she talks about an idea runs by you so fast, I swear I caught it by the tail and like roped it back into the pages, and it was done really quickly. It's called The Greatest Story Ever Told. And it's kind of just dragging a story out of someone. So both of my children, my 7-year-old and my 4-year-old, have both published and illustrated books too. My 7-year-old's first book, he wrote when he was 3. He literally glued popsicle sticks on the cover, made up the whole story word for word, made up illustrations to go along with it. And I threw it on Amazon thinking my mom would buy it and whatever. That book sells like crazy. It's incredible.
Are you serious? That's so funny. All my kids have written books, but I never thought to like publish them for them.
Oh, it's so fun. It's been a great lesson too about advertising. Like he had a book signing. Even if you're the only one who buys it, they're proud to see their book. Their schools have been really supportive and like have an author reading with the kids. It's been really cute. So
that's so cool. My son is right now, he's writing Star Wars fan fiction, and he writes on a device that I use. It's called a Neo. It's an old typing machine that and not too old, but like 80s, 90s, that kids used to take back and forth to school for typing assignments. And it has no internet access or anything. You have 3 lines on a screen that you can see and you type in it. And this kid, he goes to bed with this every night and he types in, and then we transfer it. You can plug it into your computer and transfer everything that you've written into your computer. And so, yeah, he'd be really excited if we published some of his work. That's so fun.
That's actually like, I really like just formatting on InDesign and moving their pictures around and like pulling the backgrounds off the paper. I was kind of joking with my friend. I was like, can this be my business? I just publish people's kids stuff because it's so much fun for me to take their artwork and like just get it to look good to print, you know?
So how did you get to this book? Tell me about this book because it's so creative. I want to hear about it.
When I initially started writing these other books, I knew a novel was coming. Like, I thought of myself as a writer, and I was writing these children's books, but they're, you can type them in 2 hours. Like, they're not like a novel that you're actually writing all the time. And in a lot of ways, I think some of the stuff from Willow James came from all the way in my childhood. I remember some of the things I would imagine about or think about, even like the entire universe being in the sidewalk crack of another universe and then expanding onward, those kind of things. I remember thinking about all that stuff when I was little. And this, they say there's two different people, like kinds of writers. You can either be a planner or a pantser. And a planner sits down and writes out the whole book and what's going to happen and the twists and turns and all the exciting things. That is not how I write. I wish I did, because it'd be comfortable, much more comfortable to jump into these things knowing, but I'm totally the opposite. I'm complete pantser. And when I tell you, when I'm writing this, I don't even know what's going to happen next. I mean, I get the piece that comes in and then I stop. When my daughter was in speech therapy, the speech therapist had told me that crawling helps talking, like the muscles and nerves you're pushing on your hands and your knees. And she never crawled. She went straight to walking. As soon as she said that, I said, oh, I think running yields writing, because most of the writers I know run, and running fixes writer's block. When I tell you all the ideas for these books come to me while I'm running, I have to go run to get the new information. And so I write what I have, and then I get to a point where I don't know what happens next, and I stop until the next piece finds me.
There's so much literature about that, about sort of walking meditation and how it helps your writing. And I have a lot of friends who are kind of buzzing about that right now, who hike. A lot of people who found themselves hiking more because of COVID and really doing a lot more writing because of it.
I really think for me, there's for sure a connection with that. And it's kind of fun because I don't know what's going to happen next. Now, it's tricky with two kids sometimes, because it seems like when they're busy doing something that they're totally involved in, you know, where I can sit down and write, I sit down and I have nothing. And then as soon as the idea hits me, I'm like, oh, I need to go get this down. And they need everything, So that was really interesting too. I don't remember how long my book took me, but I think it was fast. I think it was like 3.5 weeks ish. It was not as long as it seemed to me, which when you look, I mean, it's 300 pages. I'm like, I don't even think I can type that fast. But when the ideas come in, they just come to life.
So what's the premise of the book? And tell me a little bit more about the main character.
Willow. She feels like kind of left out in her family. Nothing's really wrong, but nothing's really right, And I think she just feels like there must be something more to life. Like everything's just kind of face value and boring. And then one day she stubs her toe in the sidewalk crack and watches her boot kind of swirl, and she realizes that transports her. Actually, she looks at it and gets scared and says, I can either be scared and do this or be scared and not. And she jumps, and it transports her to this whole other world, Uai, which is actually the Hawaiian word for beautiful, but I think it means like kind of beautiful wisdom. So kind of underneath all that, obviously there's, she's on this, introduced to this other world, and it's fun. There's mermaids. They learn to kite surf. She realizes that the queen's crown is missing, which is a lot of what gives that world its like power and kind of keeps everything in alignment. So the kids are, the parents are looking for it. The kids decide on their own that they think the parents don't know what they're doing, and they're going to go after it. And she can either come or not come. And they understand if she doesn't want to. There's some like laws of physics that are applicable in different ways in the different universes and things like that. But ultimately she decides to go. And then it's kind of one of those, like, find out what you're made of, sort of, see what's inside. That's where the answers lie.
I'm so excited about that story. It's so creative. I cannot wait to read it. And I feel like it has a lot of application for STEM and, for teachers to consider using in the classroom. How fun. It's a lot of potential. Tell me a little bit more about you and writing, because you obviously see yourself as a writer. Have you always seen yourself that way?
No.
And then how have you developed your writing? What resources have you relied on?
I always really liked, actually, technical writing in school was kind of my thing, like making sure that what you were, like reports, and, making sure that what you were saying was the most clear, concise, direct way. I always liked that aspect, but I never thought about myself as a writer. And if you told me when I was a little girl that I would have written books, I would have been like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not going to be me. I just want to be on the beach and fly my helicopter and leave me alone. I don't really know what, I really feel like it found me. I don't know what brought me to it. It terrifies me, like, to even tell people I wrote a book sometimes. That's part of why I started under a pen name. I have this, like, I don't want to be seen, it feels, especially writing a novel, it's like your soul on paper, it's very exposed. So for me, I was totally hiding behind this pen name. And this year I just decided I need to totally own it, own what I did. I had so many people tell me, like, I've looked for your book and I can't find it. Like, I want to read it, but nothing comes up with your name. And I'm like, oh, that's because I'm hiding and I have a pen name. It was, that was partially too, I read something about Harry Potter and why she used her initials and that kind of stuff. So it was a little bit research, but ultimately an excuse. I know these books were like pulled, drawn, pushed kind of thing, like that feeling something inside you is like, this needs to come out. You need to create this. This needs to happen. But I never would have thought that I would be doing this.
Okay,
Like,
so you just said a whole bunch of things that apply to me. I never saw myself as a writer, but then I had an idea and it had to get out. So all of the same things. And the scary part about revealing your creativity to the world and having them look at you and look at it. I mean, that's a vulnerability that I had never experienced before when I started going to writers' critique groups and stuff like that. It's so funny to think about, two women who fly helicopters. People look at us and they're like, oh, that's so exciting and brave and adventurous. And then we're nervous about our creative work. It's just a totally different thing. And there's a lot of that in the Big Magic book about how, like, working through that stuff. So you published this book how long ago under a pen name, and then you just recently re-released it, like in January, under your name. So how long has it been out there?
about a year and a half.
So you just sat down and wrote a book, or were you part of a critique group? Like, how did you develop your writing?
Yeah, I just sat down and wrote a book.
You've self-published all of these books.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever considered getting an agent?
I've tried so hard. So
Okay.
I read somewhere that Harry Potter lady it's funny, I keep talking about her. For a long time, that was my, like, goal. Like, Harry Potter's 20 years old. The children of the world need something fresh and new. And that was part of why I thought I would write this book. So that part was with me for a while. I even remember, and for so long, I just admired her so much. Her story is so great, how she came, from nothing and just wrote this book and it got picked up, and look at what it's turned into. I mean, it's brought so much joy to so many people. She got 250 rejections from agents before someone picked up her book. A lot of that, quite honestly, I feel like there are so many people writing books, it's hard to get noticed. I mean, I think I've queried like 130 agents that have told me, looks great, not my thing, whatever, or just flat out, not at this time, or that's not the genre they're looking for, or whatever.
Did you ever do anything with Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, or any of those kind of workshops or conferences?
I need to probably go to a conference and pitch my book. That's probably my next move.
Because that's kind of where I started, was by going to SCBWI. And then those experiences, I did workshops, I did some conferences, I had some agents read my work and give me feedback, and there are a variety of ways that you can do that with that organization. And then because of those experiences, I knew that I needed more structure in learning to write. So I ended up going to school and got a Master of Fine Arts in Writing for Children and Young Adults because I just needed that much work on my writing. So now, I'm connected because of those experiences in SCBWI and then the graduate school program. Now I'm connected to other people in the industry. So if I ever do pull this book together that I'm working on, I have one like you that is my baby, like it was my big idea. And then I have another one that I started when I retired from the Coast Guard in 2019 that I've been kind of using as like my playful writing to just really explore writing and revision with less pressure because I am so emotionally attached to that other work. And I just wanted the freedom of just a fun book that I could play with to just really exercise my writing before I go back to the other one and put my baby out into the world, hopefully someday. So what are you going to write next?
It's the sequel to Willow James. It's called Willow James and the Key to Nau'au, which is another Hawaiian word. Ui means beauty. Nau'au is that power inside of all of us.
Are you from Hawaii? Where are all these Hawaiian influences coming in?
I lived in San Diego and I love surfing, and I just have been like, whatever the Hawaii, like when I'm writing these books, I have Hawaii dreams. I would love to go there. I've never been there, but it just has creeped into this book for some reason and set up camp. So
that's so cool. And I heard you say earlier that Willow does some kite surfing. I'm a kite boarder. I love doing that. So anyway, it's all just so creative and so exciting. I can't wait to read it. What advice do you have for any women in aviation who have a book idea and want to write?
Write the book. You'd be amazed at how many people say, "Oh, you wrote a book? I've always wanted to write a book. What do I do?" And I say, write the book. I'll tell you everything to do after you write the book, but just write the book, because that, for some reason, there's so many things that we put in front of just not actually getting the book on paper. You have to take down all those roadblocks and just get the book on paper. And it doesn't have to be perfect, and you can edit it later and you can change it, and it can be an ever evolving thing. But it's amazing that people just stop right there. They freeze. And I don't know why. I mean, it's scary to put yourself out there. It's scary to take on something like this and finish it. And then what if it's not good? Or, what if nobody buys it or whatever? And I mean, I would be a total liar if I said that I didn't worry about that stuff too. In some ways, there are days where I'm just so hard on myself, like an agent hasn't picked me up. This must not be good. And then there are other days when one person tells me like, "Oh my God, I just read this and it was amazing. It made my week." Like, my daughter has gained so much confidence. If it makes one person's life better, then it was successful. It was worth it. If you're able to connect with someone and make a difference through your writing, then you're a success, no matter what the rest of it looks like. And that's something I guess I wish somebody had told me too, because there's just so many expectations around, what you think it should look like, instead of just letting it be what it is. So just write the book if you want to write the book. And like I said, I know that sounds obvious, but that really is the toughest part.
That book idea for me marinated in my head for like 5 years. And then I discovered National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, which is November. People all over the world sign up online to write 50,000 words in the month of November. And I did that. And so I just wrote the book. And then I read the book and I was like, okay, we probably need a little bit of work on our writing. So let's go learn about that. And then, but you're right. You've got to start by writing. You have to start there. Put your butt in the seat and get in front of a keyboard of some sort, or handwrite. Some people like to handwrite and just write your story. So what are some of the things that you tell people after they've written the book? Like you said, I'll tell you everything. So tell us a few things that you learned along the way.
I know self-published advertising and marketing is the toughest part. So you could have written the greatest book ever and one person reads it and loves it, but for them to love it enough to hand it to somebody else and say, "You have to read this book." Even with that could go through 10 people or 5 people. Well, that's a drop in the ocean of being able to really reach the masses, which is where I think traditional publishing might be good. I know that there are a lot of self-published authors right now too, because it's so accessible. So Some of the mistakes I made, my first book, I went with Ingram Spark because I really wanted a hardcover, and that was the only way, but they charge like $50 to upload your files and then $25 every time you want to make a change, which didn't sound like a lot at the time. But if you're like me and every typo and every punctuation, any little thing you want to update, each time it's costing you money, when there's a free way to do it, which is with Amazon's website, KDP. So the same thing too, you have to like register your book with an ISBN. Those are like $125. You have to buy that on your own. If you go through any of the like Lightning Source or any of the same major publishing companies that agents would use to get in, Barnes and Noble and all those stores. But Barnes and Noble can still pick your book up through Amazon. I saw mine for sale one day. They had bought a bunch of copies and they were selling it. So they can use Amazon too. So Amazon gives you free registration and free to upload your books and free changes. And the printing costs are, they're all kind of similar, I think. So anyway, that's one thing I would tell them to do. That's an easy way to just get it out there and give you a print on demand copy in your hands right away if you want to do self-published, and then try to figure out the marketing stuff on after that.
Did you use an editor?
No. I had friends read it to look for typos.
You mentioned earlier that you did the art yourself?
For my first book, I did. For my second book, I lucked out. I found this amazing artist, and she lives in Switzerland. I found her on Instagram, and when I hear so many people tell me stories about just their vision is different than the artist's vision or something. I found her. I asked her if she would do it. She agreed to it. We quickly came to terms on a contract that was really fair and easy. I mean, it couldn't have been simpler. When I tell you she had a vision for this project, I gave her no guidance, and everything she came up with was better than what I was picturing. I mean, it was like, the whole time I was just floored. Working with her was incredible. And I have written a sequel to that one, Mama Do You Know Part 2. That's 12 more questions. I would love if she illustrated it again. Willow James right now is just text. I think it would be awesome to find an artist that style kind of match the book and eventually have an illustrated copy. But for me right now, cost of an illustrator versus, what it would add was just kind of not really practical. And the first book, I did illustrate myself. I cannot paint. I cannot color with colored pencils, but I can draw with pencil. And I can paint in Photoshop. So painstakingly, pixel by pixel, I would draw with a pencil my picture, and then I would put it in Photoshop and pull the background off. And then I took the Photoshop paintbrushes and painted each illustration, which took
Wow. So self-publishing is very popular, and my husband we're all voracious readers. He reads lots of self-published, adult work. And the thing that I see for children's books that I am hoping to go through traditional publishing for the access that you have to the gatekeepers, the parents, the teachers, and the librarians. Just being able to get those books funneled through the traditional publishing pipeline. That's kind of how I see just for my children's books. And I recognize that that's going to be a much longer road, probably a little more painful. And then the nuance of being a picture book writer like you are and having that art. So when you give your manuscript to an agent and to a publisher, they select the artist. You don't have really any input on that. You give up that creative control. You can get, like, if they have it totally wrong, you can say, that character doesn't have that skin color, or, those feathers shouldn't look like that on that kind of bird. But generally speaking, like, you give up creative control of the picture portion of any picture book in traditional publishing. So it's really special that you found an artist that you thought matched your book, and that she was easy to work with and did it better than your imagination. I love when that happens.
I was so lucky. I mean, she was just incredible.
This is so fun. It's been so fun to talk to you. Is there anything else you want to talk about for the writers out there who are thinking about publishing?
Get it out there. I feel like the world needs more books. I just think, especially helicopter pilots, female helicopter, there are so few of us, there were 350 pilots at my company and two of us were girls. So to pass those stories on to little girls where it just gets to be more normal, I think everybody has an incredible story to share. So get it out there, write your ideas.
Yeah, I love to share the story of my daughter who, because I used to go to the Women in Aviation International conferences with the Coast Guard, and I would take my daughter, and my daughter saw me. The women make up 8% of pilots in the Coast Guard, and so my daughter, though, because I was friends with a lot of these women, she would see them all the time, and she sat behind me. She was about 6 years old, and I was reading a copy of WAI magazine. There was some article about a helicopter pilot in there, and she goes, "Mommy, can boys fly helicopters too?" So it's really neat. Like your
Yeah.
kids are writing, they see you writing. It's all about what you're exposed to and what you see as possible, right?
Yeah, I actually have one of my favorite videos is my son. He was 2 or 3. He was little. And I was like, "Hey, do you want to be a pilot when you grow up?" And he's like, "No, that's a girl job. Like, I'm not doing that girl job." And I was like, "Oh my God." Because every friend I've had over is a girl pilot. And I ended up taking him to my work and like showing him, like, "See these 20 boys in the room? They're all helicopter pilots." And he was like, "No. Wait, boys can do this?" I'm like, "Yeah." The new books will help that. The old books were written in old times with old stuck ideas. And, there are people writing apologies for some of the stuff in their books, and we just need new books.
This has been so fun. Thank you
And
so much,
yeah,
Sarah.
no, thank you so much for having me. I really think it's cool what you're doing, promoting other women who are writing and doing aviation. It's kind of a unique niche. So I just think that's really cool. I've looked at all your work with your podcast and the writing club and the reading club, and I just think that's really awesome.
Thank you.